بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. يا ربنا زدنا علما وتقوى وبارك في أوقاتنا وفي أقوالنا وفي أفعالنا وتقبل منا ولا تأخذنا بذنوبنا واحفظنا من الذين يقصدون سوءا لنا ونصلي ونسلم على محمد وهو إمامنا وحبيبنا وآخر الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وهو رحمة للعالمين. We wanted to focus on an important issue here, and that is, the fact that in this time of crisis, there's been a vacuum in leadership. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. There's been a vacuum of leadership. And when leadership has emerged, some of the positions that have been taken have been extremely confusing for people. And some of the people in the community have been arguing about what should be done, how Muslims should respond. And so this happens quite often. And so the failure of the Muslim community to really produce a solid leadership in the U.S. is not the failure of all of us as a community. That's something that we have to not take responsibility for. Because there's been many of us that have been committed to the development of the Muslim community in the U.S. in varying capacities, in different ways. And many of us have committed our time, our lives, our efforts, our wealth, our families, beyond where many that today are in a leadership position have. So some have taken leadership positions, but they haven't sacrificed necessarily for the Muslim community in terms of their effort, investment, and time, and their actual commitment overall. And this is part of the problem while we're failing to have a functional leadership that's capable of addressing the situation of the Muslims. So the responsibility for that is not on all of the Muslim community, you know what I'm saying, is on a large part of it. But there's a segment of the Muslim community which has been pushing for a very long time in many different ways on the necessity of cultivating an actual mature, responsible leadership that's capable of addressing the issue of the Muslims. And one of the things that I have to say, and this is a message to the professional community, as part-timers, let's just let the wind take its course. As part-timers, you can't expect to be on deck. You understand what I'm saying? You can't expect to be on deck in the way that the Muslim community needs. That's not legit. That's irresponsible before the Sharia, right? It's an issue of the amanat. Who do you give an amanat to, right? That becomes part of the problem that we confront. And so at the end of the day, the wind is blowing intensely. And so it might create a disruption in the voice. But for mental health, it's important to be in natural spaces. And so I have to commit myself to that. So in any event, I apologize for that, for the disruption of the natural environment. But, if we want to move forward, we have to realize that we have to rethink how to do leadership. There's many communities now in which their imams are out. There's many communities now in which they basically have no one to respond to the community needs. We have a concept where we think that the community is not responsible for Islamic counseling. We have a concept in which we think that the community is not responsible for looking after the poor. We have a concept in which we think that the community can function without leadership that's empowered. No community in the U.S. functions like that. And this is what I keep saying over and over again. You know what I'm saying? No community in the U.S., not in the Jewish community, not in the Christian community, and not in any other communities, of organization do they function in such a way that leadership is strangle-held, or leadership is usurped into certain pockets that are not capable of really meeting the community demands. And that we have a responsibility before the Sharia in that regard. And this is why people that are given the community responsibility, or the responsibility to look after the community, are people that are capable of handling that task. And so overall, the community should be in a position of assistance to that leadership so that it can move forward. But because we have fallen in love with power and power positions, as a community, and because we have fallen in love with position and station and title, we're in a situation now where there's a vacuum. We're in a situation in which there's a vacuum. And so those who are on the ground doing the work with the community, they know, everything is not always advertised. But there's a failure here that is not going to allow this community to move forward, right? And that failure is failing in empowering the proper people to be in place, right? And that means giving them their space to operate and staying out of the way, right? Because they're qualified. They put in the time, they put in the effort. They may need to grow in certain areas, but so what? Everybody needs to grow. Everybody needs professional development. And so that's something that, we tell the professional communities, like, you need to really be careful of what direction that you're going in, because you're collapsing the internal growth of the Muslim community itself with just wanting to be in charge. And this is the issue which is striking us right now. People like to be in charge, but they don't want to deal with the crisis management of the community. They don't want to deal with the 2 o'clock in the morning phone calls. They don't want to go beyond a half a minute of a person crying on their shoulder. They don't want to be responsible for educating the community in the objectives, but they want to dictate down to the community of what should be done, what should be done, or they want to tell the community that give us your money and then we can move forward. No, we can't unite. Unfortunately, we can't unite because we're not in a position to unite. Unity demands a willingness. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he carried out the dawah in the beginning of the situation, of the Muslims coming into Mecca, it wasn't everybody that was at the table. It was those who were committed to the cause, those who were willing to sacrifice themselves. They were the ones that were there at the front lines, and the rest of the Muslims supported that effort, right? And so unity is not going to come just by calling for unity. That doesn't work. Unity comes from people being on the ground, and then we collaborate together in efforts which are tangible and very real. But when you have 1,000 people at the discussion table as to what should be done, and people don't have the experience of going and being on the ground, or they have other priorities, they're immediately going to, shrug off the priority of dealing with the community, and they're going to go to their needs or to their interests. And that's what we're seeing over and over again. So we can unite on what issues? We can unite on knowing that something has to be done. We can unite on having an understanding that we can't go back to what was normal in the pre-COVID phase, because what we're seeing is the breakdown of the community in the pre-COVID phase. And so with that said, let me just let the wind blow a little bit. This is a call to the necessity of cultivating servant leadership. We have to cultivate leadership that's going to be committed to the community, educationally, in a capacity to service the Muslim community. That's not going to come with getting a PhD in Islamic studies. Most of the Islamic universities don't know how to train leadership. That's a reality. And I'm telling you, as being a product of Islamic educational institutions, they're not in a capacity. They don't have an understanding. They were not shaped of taking up the cause of taking knowledge and applying it to community issues, to social issues. That's just the reality on the ground. And so we need to develop a leadership. We need to be supportive of leadership initiatives. And what I mean by that is not leadership for the sake of power. I mean leadership for the sake of preparing people that will be responsible, to address the community needs and to carry that effort. And so as a community, that's what we should be demanding. We need to have an understanding that we need community to be developed first. And within that context, we need leadership to be developed. It's those twofold. That is a twofold process. And the reason why I say that is because too many people are arguing about what's going on based on what people from overseas are saying, or based on the ideas and opinions of people that are not committed to the community on the ground. And so that's not doing anything for us. It's not doing anything for us but creating hardship. Someone inboxed me and asked me, well, what do your scholars say about protesting? Said, or what's the ruling on protesting? Just as an example. Said, first of all, in this situation, there's no general ruling on protesting. Not all protests are the same. So there's no general ruling on protesting, because we can say protesting is allowable, and then there may be a form of protesting that's going on which is detrimental. Not all form of protesting is the same. And not all situations of protest are legitimate, or not all forms of protest are illegitimate. That's ridiculous. We have to look at the situation as it changes in times and places. But people have the ability to voice themselves. People have the ability to want to, move for change. And that doesn't always come in a nice way. We have to look at that reality at the end of the day. But if we don't have a community base, if we don't have a leadership within the American context, we're never going to move forward, people. And you can't continue to say that there's no scholarship here, or that there's senior scholars in another place. Those senior scholars are senior scholars for those communities, not for the whole of the ummah, right? Those scholars, how can you be a senior scholar if you've never been to Brooklyn, New York? You've never been to North Philadelphia. And you don't know anything about the people or the culture or what goes on there. And you're going to give a fatwa that pertains to that community and this situation and that people? That's the most ridiculous thing to be heard of. You can give a general advice, but if you're not from that community, how is it that you can guide that community? You're thousands of miles away. You know what I'm saying? And so the mentality that we have as a Muslim community is one in which we're not understanding what our obligations are. It's okay to make mistakes. Haven't you ever heard of the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? There's people that are qualified to make an effort towards ijtihad. You know what I'm saying? Haven't you ever heard of the person that makes ijtihad and makes a mistake that they get a reward? Some of our mashayikh have told us, like Dr. Taha Jabir, one of the senior scholars of the ummah, and Usul al-Fiqh, he told us in front of a board of Azhari imams and scholars, let them. Why do we try to control them? He was talking about us, the Americans. Why are we trying to control them? Let them try to deal with their affairs. And that was like about 10, 15 years ago almost now. You know what I'm saying? Let them try to deal with their affairs. Let them. Why are we always trying to control them? And he admitted. And so that's the issue. We have enough knowledge to be able to come up with solutions through dialogue and research to deal with our situations and circumstances. And when the situation gets beyond us and our capacity, we can be humble enough to say it's beyond us and our capacity. But not every detailed issue, or not every issue that goes on in our society needs to be solved by a scholar from another region. That's the issue. And my advice to the African American community in specific, as brothers on multiple levels, is that, that is an approach which has undermined the community, and to the general Muslim community in the Americas. That is an approach which has undermined this community from developing. That's part of the problem. The other part of the problem is that you have too many people that are in leadership that are not qualified to be there. And that's why people begin to look and they say, well, let's follow the senior scholars as a way to solve the problem of people not being qualified, being in leadership. And so we have to be serious about our own community and its development. And before leaving, I want to say, and I've mentioned this in many lives, but I mention it again because it's a pertinent issue. Right now, we're in a crisis moment. We need to be practical in how we're dealing with our community needs. You don't need a fatwa to know that we need to be attentive of the unemployed and attentive of the homeless and attentive of those who don't have food to feed themselves. We need organization in that regard. We don't need a fatwa to say that we need to aid those who are having mental health issues. We need organization for that. We don't need a fatwa to tell us that we need to organize our single people and take them through a process of how it is that they can find a suitable partner and prepare for a partnership. We need organization for that. You understand what I'm saying? We don't need a fatwa to tell us that we need to build communities which are hosts. We need organization for that. And so that's something which we should be clear of. I'm going to go. The barakah is coming down right now. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.